Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Samach Zayin, Bava Metzia 67. We're going to start on the bottom of Samach Vav on the base 66b, around 20 lines or 15 lines from the bottom. Rav Bar Shava have a Masik Be Rav Kahana Zuze. So Rav Bar Shana owed Rav Kahana money. Amrle Ilo Parano Chal Yom Poni Gavi Mehai Chamra. So he says, if I don't collect from you if I don't pay you back by this and this day, collect from Samach Vav Amabez 66b at the bottom. He says, if I don't pay you by this day, collect from my wine. So Savra Papa Meimar Ki Amrina Nasmachta Kanya. So Rav Papa thought to say, well, now with that which we say that if it's an asmachta, it's not binding. Hani Mili Ba'ara the Lav was a Bunekaima. This will be in the case of land that it's not meant to be sold, and that's why we say that it's that just because you said it doesn't mean it's binding. But by wine, even though it's a bune ka, but wine, since it's meant to be sold, kizuzi dami. Well, maybe it's like money, and so therefore it's binding. So Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua Papa. No, called the ilokani. Anything that you say which sounds like it's an exaggeration, it's preposterous, it's not binding. Amar Rav Nachman, Hashta de Amar Rabbanan Asmachta Lokanya. So Rav Nachman said now that the rabbis have said if it's an asmachta, it's not binding. Hadar Arav, Hadar Pere. In a case where you made a promise, I'm going to give my land if I don't pay by this certain date, and then you didn't pay by that date, and so therefore the land was not bind. Therefore, you're going to give back. The land is going to come back to you, but not only the land, but also the fruits that the person ate, that the lender ate. So Gemara says, "L'meimer the Savar of Nachman mechila betos," that this is a mistaken waiver. So he thought I'm giving you my fruits to the lender, but he really in the end he wasn't. So it's a mistaken waiver. It's not considered a waiver, and he gets his fruits back. No, Samach Vav Amabez. Samach Vav Amabez at the bottom. So the Gemara says. So he says, how could that be the case? But we learned how can we say that according to Rav Nachman, if you make a waiver by mistake, it's not a waiver? But doesn't Rav Nachman say? Well, we learned that if somebody, it says, let's say a person is saying, I'm selling the fruits of the palm tree to my friend, meaning to say the fruits are not yet in existence. I'm selling them to my friend. So, Amar Afuna, that this is what's called the case of you're being mocked, now you're handing over something that's not yet in existence. So Afuna says, before the dates come into existence, then you can renege because the dates are not yet in existence. But once the dates are in existence, and even though you made the kinyan before it was not in existence, once it's in existence, you can't renege on it. Nachman says, because you made a transaction about something that's not yet in existence, it's not binding at all. So even once it's in existence, you can go back on it. Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, even though I say you could go back on it, Modina, I'll admit, that if the person would go ahead and eat from the dates, then we don't uproot them. So that's a mistaken waiver. He allows them to eat from the dates, and we don't uproot it. So, but in the earlier case, he says a mistaken waiver. Here in this case, he says, he's saying that in the earlier case, Rav Nachman had said, that if it's a mistaken waiver, it's not a waiver, and you'll get it back. But in this case, he's saying a mistaken waiver is still a waiver. So it's a contradiction. So the Gemara says, no, Hasam Sabine Hachalva. One is a case by a sale, and one is a case by a loan. In the case of the dates, it's a sale, and so therefore even though the waiver was done in mistake, he doesn't have to go back and return the fruits that he ate. But in this case, it was a loan, and so therefore he has to return the dates that he ate because it appears to be like interest. So Amar Rava, so now Rava says, so is this really this idea that Rav Nachman says that if it's a mistaken waiver, it's not going to be considered a waiver and you have to return it? Amar Rava, what about the case on the top of Samach Zayin Amar Aleph? Rava says, Avi Yasivna Kamei Rav Nachman. I was sitting in front of Rav Nachman, Ubayu Usvei Ona, and I wanted to ask him about Ona. What's Ona? Ona was from the last chapter, from Azav, where you overpaid, price fraud. So I want to say there, you overpay, and in the end, it's returned to you. So that's a mistaken waiver, and we say there, it is going to be considered like it's not a waiver. But whereas here you're saying Rav Nachman says a mistaken waiver, Rav Nachman is saying in this case that mechil b'taos avi mechila, but there in the case of Onam, mistaken waiver is not a waiver. So the Gemara explains. So I wanted to ask about the case of Ona, because in the case of Ona, even though he gave it and he made a mistake, so we see mechil b'taos, and a mistaken waiver there is not considered a waiver. And here we're saying, in our case over here, you're saying that by a case of a sale, that mistaken waiver is a waiver. So the Gemara answers that Rav Huna says, I was sitting for Rav Nachman, I wanted to ask him about this Udik, and he jumped up because he saw I was going to ask this question. He says, Chazisa, an islandist. Basically, like, I'm going to respond to you from about a case of an islandist. An islandist is a girl who grows up and never demonstrates the signs of being a woman. So the Gemara first fleshes out the question, then explains it. Oh, the price fraud is a case where there's a mistaken waiver. We don't consider it to be a waiver. You have to return the money. It's a case of a sale. Udik, and he responds, Chazisa and Ionis. All right, Ionis, the case of this Ionis, the Mechila B'Tawasi, that's also a mistaken waiver. V'ahavi Mechila, and that is going to be considered a waiver. Why? The Tanan. We learned, I don't know, I'm learning the Mishnah. Hamema Enes, that's a girl who is rabbinically married and she refuses the marriage. Vashniya, that's a second degree relative. They're not allowed to get married. Va'ionis, and the Ionis is this girl who's not really a woman, doesn't become a woman. They're not entitled to their ksuva. They don't, when you divorce them, because for the case of the Shni and the Ionis, we don't want them to stay married, so she doesn't get a ksuba. That means the husband doesn't need to give her his fruits. He doesn't have to redeem her. He doesn't have to support her. And he doesn't have to give her, she's not entitled to the worn out clothes that she brought into the marriage. So we see from here that the husband doesn't need to return the things that he gave to her when she thought she was his wife, even though when she basically made a waiver mistake, even though it's now very clear that she was not his wife. So, and the reason is because she waived her rights to them. And so even though it's a mechila b'taos, so we see that a mistaken waiver is considered a waiver. And this contradicts the case of the Ona, which was the question that was being brought about on Rav Nachman, because the Ona says mechila b'taos is a waiver. Mechila b'taos, that if you make the waiver by mistake, it doesn't count as a waiver. We make you return it. Because I'll give you the case of, I'll bring to you the case of the islanders where it was a mistaken waiver and it still counts and the husband doesn't have to return it. So the Gemara says that after Rav Nachman said that, the Gemara disagrees. V'lohi, it's wrong. Lo ona havi v'lo ailon is misaywe. Ona is not a refutation, and ailonis is not a support for this argument. Meaning to say, Oh, no, to you. To the case of no is not a refutation. The case of no, where we say a mistaken waiver goes back to the person who paid the money. That's not a question. It's not a contradiction to the case of the dates. Why? Because the person doesn't know he's being defrauded there, that he waived anything. He didn't know that he was waiving anything. So he didn't know he was waiving the right to the price, the right price, so that he's entitled to its return. Well, idleness, in the case of idleness, is not a support for the idea that a mistaken waiver still counts as a waiver. The nichola, because in that case, she's it's not a mistaken waiver. It's to her advantage to take a isha. She wants it to be considered like she's married. So she likes the fact that people think she's married at that time. So she was not mistaken in waiving her rights. Mar tells us a case. It's decided there was a case of a woman. The Amrle lahu gavra zil zabenli arami krivai. She says, "Go buy from." There's a case of a woman that she said, "The Amrle lahu gavra." She said to a certain man, "Go buy for me this land from my relatives." Azal zabenla. He went and he bought the land from the relative. Amrle. So the relative said to the agent, "When I get the money, you have to sell it back to me." Amarle, the agent said, "At v'navla achi." He said, "You and Navla are brothers." Rashi says it means he's saying, "You and she are relatives, and you'll work it out." What is Navla? Navla is an Aramaic word for whether it's a male or whether it's a female. I mean to say that this is an Aramaic word for, we're not sure if it applies to both a man and a woman. It's like in modern parlance, if we don't have a word for a person who is trans, we say they. Here's the ultimate word in Aramaic. It's called Navla. So you and this person will work it out. But Rashi says a different explanation, that this is her name. Anyway, so we see from here, Rashi says that the person says, you and she will work it out. So it's not sure exactly what that means. Are you saying you and she will work it out, meaning say I agree or I don't agree? Amar Sam Chadaite. Join it. He says Sam Chadaite. So he says, well, you agree to it. V'lo gamar umikne. And so therefore, he's saying, hello, my dear friends. Shkoyach to you. Shkoyach. Wow, everybody's coming in now. We got the clever here. He says, under these conditions, the seller understands that indeed the woman is agreeing to this, and therefore he doesn't. And so therefore he's giving her the land only under these. She's buying the land only under these conditions. So basically, we're in the middle of the page on 67a. So therefore, ara hadre perimai. So in that case, the land has to return if the guy gets his money. But what about the produce that she ate in the meantime? Do we say it's ribis ketzutza? Or do we say that the fruit she's eating is actual interest? The yotzim b'dayanin, and when he comes to buy back the land, he's also entitled to the fruits, because otherwise it would be considered like a form of interest for her. And the judges will even give it back. Odilma kiavak ribis habu, or do we say no? It's her consumption of the fruits is not actual interest, just like the dust of interest, like rabbinic interest. And everybody says it doesn't go back. Rava says it's a vak ribis, it's like interest, but not actual interest, so it doesn't have to return. And Amarle Abai Rava, so Abai says to Rava, Mashkanta mai. So Abai says to Rava, let's say she didn't buy the field from him, and that with him demanding the right to buy it back, but rather, let's say a person gives a collateral on the field, meaning say somebody lends a loan, Reuben lends money to Shimon, and Shimon gives his collateral, and he says, he doesn't say anything to him about eating the produce. He doesn't say, okay, you can eat this amount of produce. The guy just is holding his field as a collateral, and in the meantime, he's eating the fruits of the field. So it's a form of interest. So what's going to be the law in that case? In that case, why do we say it's just like dust of interest? Because it wasn't an established amount. Here in this case of the mashkanta, it's basically just a not fixed interest, and therefore this person could keep it. And this argues with Rav Nachman, who says that not only does the land have to be returned, but also the fruits. So the Gemara says, Amar Papa, Avad Ravina Uvda v'chashav v'afik peri deloka Rab Barafuna. Indeed, in that case of the mashkanta, Rav Papi did a ruling, and he says not in the case where you got the field as a collateral, and then the person came and repaid the money and he got his field back, he made a ruling that if you ate the fruits, it will be a form of interest, and he made him pay it back. So we're like 7 lines or 10 lines on the bottom on 67a. Amar Mar Braid Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava. Hamashkanta. So this case of this collateral, where a person gave his field as a collateral till his loan was paid back. Ba'asra de Misalki, in a circumstance where the borrower has the right now sometimes they do these types of loans today. Sometimes you lend money and the person does not have the right to pay it back until a certain date. I know people take out these loans because they lock them at a very high interest rate and you can't pay them back early. So that's why Ma'abarader Rav Yosef says in the name of Rava. So let's say you have a collateral, a field, and it's a place where you could pay it back whenever you want. Then under those circumstances, Achal Shiur Zuze. So basically, let's say we're talking about a case, so that the borrower has the right to pay it back whenever he wants. And so therefore, if the lender is eating the fruits, that's a form of interest. But let's say, so once the lender has eaten the amount that the borrower owes him, misalkinale, achal shiur zuzeh misalkinale. Once the lender has consumed the amount of the value of the loan, and the borrower could kick him out. But achal tfei, but let's say the lender eats more than that, lo mafkina minei. We don't take out the rest because this is not a fixed interest. This is just avak ribis. It's inexact interest, and therefore the court doesn't make him return that. And also, let's say he has another debt. We don't transfer the extra money that he's eating onto a different loan. However, if the loan was for the purpose of orphans, and so therefore the land was that was given as a collateral was from the orphans, then achal kashir zuzeh, then once he eats the amount of the loan, misalkinale, we can remove him from the land. But achal tfei mafkina minei. But if he ate more than it, indeed we make him pay it back. And machashvina mishtar. For the orphans, we are stricter. We make sure that they get back even the avak ribis, and also we take the extra money that he takes and we deduct it from a different debt that they have. Amar Ravashi, Hasha de Amres, Elchal Tfelo Mafkina Mines. Ravashi says, now that we said if he ate more than the amount, we don't make him pay it back as interest of a Shiur Zuzi, then also Achal Shiur Zuzi, Namilo Masakina lay below Zuzi. Also, once he eats that exact amount, once he ate the exact amount, we don't make him leave the property without zuzim, but rather he needs to pay all the principal. My timer, because what's the reason? Because since at the outset he wasn't eating it with the intent of diminishing the principal, but rather he was eating it with the intent that fruits would be in addition to the principal. Therefore, at the outset, it was considered a form of avak ribis. And so therefore, seluke below zuze afuke minehu. So then making him leave the land without getting his principal back is a form of making him pay back the avak ribis. Avak ribis, so if that was their outset, you don't make him pay back the avak ribis. So that's what Rav Ashi's chiddush is. So Rav Ashi uvda b'yisovim katanim. So Rav Ashi did this incident with minor orphans, and what they had done was they borrowed using their land as a collateral, and then the lender consumed the fruits. And Rav Ashi ruled that they're not allowed to get back the land from the lender, even though he ate the amount of the debt, until they pay off the loan. And he ruled for them kigdom. He ruled, we're on top of 67b, he ruled for them like they were adults. He ruled very strictly. Amar Rava, Braid Rav Yosef Mishnei de Rabba. So now we're saying, what's the halacha here? So Rava says, it says Rava, the son of Rav Yosef, in the name of Rava, Hai mashkanta va'asar de misalki. This a lender in a place where you could pay back the money whenever you want. Well, the lender, when he eats the fruits, he can only consume it as by deducting the amount from the loan. Meaning to say he's not allowed to do that. The only way he could do it is that if he deducts a certain amount, a fixed amount from the loan for every year that the loan is not paid back. And so then there's not going to be a prohibition of interest, even if the fruits end up being more than the loan, because it's a fixed amount. And so therefore, it's not going to be looking like interest. Meaning to say, it's not that he's eating the fruits. It means that every year that this person doesn't pay him back, he, let's say, deducts 20% of the loan or 30% of the loan. So therefore, since it doesn't look like a fixed amount, it's not going to look like interest. But Sorba made the Rabbanan, and let's say it was a Torah scholar who is the lender there. Even with Nachyaisa, even by doing it in this manner, he won't do it. Why not? It's Sorba Rabbanan. And this actually relates to our parsha this week, because the Tzur de Rabbanan is a Torah scholar, and Rashi says, a Torah scholar has to go to an even higher level and to become sacred even on those things that are permitted. Why? Otherwise, if the Torah scholar does X, everybody else, if the Torah scholar does 90%, everybody's going to say, well, that's the rabbi, so I'll do 80% of what the rabbi does. So the rabbi has to be better. Rabbi has to say, I'll do 120, so everybody else does 100. So therefore, the Tzur ben Rabbanan can't even do the interest in this manner, where he deducts a fixed amount every year. So if that's the case, how will it be permitted even for a Torah scholar to eat it? How will the Torah scholar be permitted to eat it? Bikitzusa. What's the kitzusa? Meaning to say that they establish from the outset how many years he'll get the fruits. And Gemara is going to explain how it's permitted. So Gemara says, that's only according to one who says kitzusa is permitted. What about the one who says kitzusa is prohibited? So this is a debate, because we went to Inmar kitzusa, pligi be Ravacha v'Ravina, chad amar kitzusa sharia, chad amar kitzusa asir. This is a debate. Is kitzusa allowed or not? What's kitzusa? So the Amar way, that where the lender says to the borrower, ad chamesh shanin achilna le below nechyai. So the first 5 years I'll consume the fruits without deducting anything. And from that point on, I'm going to calculate all the fruits and I'll deduct them from the debt. And the reason why it's permitted is because it doesn't look like interest at all. That looks like a sharecropper, meaning to say he's working the land. So basically on the condition that for the first 5 years, he does not eat the fruits, and then the next 5 years. The first 5 years, the sharecropper gets the fruits, and the next 5 years, the fruits go to the owner of the property. So therefore, that's going to be permitted. Like it's done in that manner. Like it looks like a regular business deal. Ikadamri kol below nachyoisa. Aser. Any case that there is no nachyaisa, there's no deduction, is prohibited. So what's kitusa? The amalei ad chamesh shanim achilna benachya. So the first 5 years, I'll eat the fruits and I'll deduct the amount. The next 5 years, I'll give you all the fruits, and so therefore, that doesn't look like interest. So the one who says the first case is prohibited, so the latter case will be permitted. And the one who says the latter case is prohibited. So under what circumstance will be allowed to eat the fruit? So the Gemara says, Shari ki mashkanta de surah. It will be permitted like the mashkanta of surah. What did they do? The kasva behachi, that they wrote as follows: B'mishlam shnaya ilun tepuk ara dablo kasef. At the end of this amount of years, this land will be returned to you without any money. Meaning to say that they established a certain amount of years that the lender will eat the fruits of the land. And at the end of these years, the land will go back to the borrower and the debt will be over. So this does not look like a loan at all, but rather it looks like somebody purchased the land for its fruits for a certain number of years for the price of the loan. And even though these fruits that he's eating are worth a lot more than the value of the loan, it doesn't look like this is not going to be the prohibition of interest. So it's obviously they're trying to figure out what's the difference between a loan and a regular business transaction. This mashkanta in a place where you can pay back the loan whenever you want. Ein bal chov gove mena. The creditor, a creditor of the lender, is not allowed to collect from that property, even though the lender is typically allowed to collect from the other properties. You can't collect from that because it looks like it's interest. The Eina Bechor Nota Ba Pishnayim, and then if the firstborn inherits it, he doesn't get twice. Ushvius Mishamtena, and the sabbatical year will cancel this loan. Uba'asr the lomas, because the person could take it back whenever he wants. Uba'asr the lomasalki, but in a place where he can't take it back whenever he wants, then Balchov Govayman, and then the creditor can indeed collect from it. Ubechor no Pishnayim, and the firstborn takes twice. Ve'in Shvius Mishamtena, and the sabbatical year doesn't cancel it because this is considered to be like the person already owns it because he has it for a certain amount of years. In a place where the person who gave the collateral can remove the person who's holding the property, that is the case even from dates that are basically already collected, that they're in the nets. And if you put them in baskets, kananinu. But I mean, once they're in baskets, then the lender acquired them. And the one who says, well, no, the purchaser in the domain of the seller, the purchaser has acquired if his utensils there. Okay, even if he didn't put them in baskets there. So, okay, we have to daven. Sorry, we have to stop here to daven. And